Generally on a screenwriting panel, they have an open bar before the event, so we're not used to being this sober, so we apologize in advance. True that. That's for sure. We're about here. Here we go.
Okay, the doors are closed. We are ready to begin this fiesta. Everybody seated? Okay, welcome to the screenwriting panel. Most of you here are either authors wanting to become screenwriters or you're screenwriters. Either way, you're going to learn one way or the other, going from one side to the other or from that side back again. We have a panel here, which I can tell you anybody on this panel could basically hold a 4-hour class in this up by themselves. So I'm going to go through the introductions very quickly. We don't have a lot of time. And the way we're going to kind of do this panel is I've got a bunch of questions here, and I'm going to direct them individually to each particular person. We're not going to do like a round question because one question, that's a half an hour right there. But we hopefully will have a Q&A so we can catch up on that. So I'm going to go through my introductions here very quickly if I can because, like I said, there's so much stuff here. John Truby, right next to me here. John is well known throughout the writer's world for his intense study of writing and the business of writing. Through his many books, he has tackled everything from the overview of writing on an individual level to the marketing not only of your work, but of yourself as a brand. His books are informative, detailed, and cover a huge area of genre and scope. Ines Johnson. Now, I love this description. I took this off of her bio. Ines reimagines the stories of old in a modern world. Now, her books are provocative, intriguing, steamy, and manages to turn the tropes of romantic mythology on its head. She's very prolific. She has several book series. Her work is not light reading by any stretch of the imagination. And I mean that in the character sense as well. Very, very deep, well thought out characters and stories. She's also an instructor, and she has several courses available for writers of all levels. Thomas Dean Donnelly. Ta-da! Okay, Thomas lists himself as a novelist, screenwriter, troublemaker, which is a bit of a triple redundancy in my opinion. He is an accomplished screenwriter who has moved into the realm of novels. In fact, several of his films, I've already told them this, are favorites of mine. Sahara, Conan, and probably several others that we talked to have NDAs and cannot talk about those. They're very popular films, though. His first book, however, Year of the Rabbit, a Malcolm Chaucer thriller, I'm assuming that is the title of a series?
Yeah, Chaucer. Yeah.
Chaucer.
Yes.
Chaucer. Repito, por favor, en inglés. Most of the people here are, as I said, perhaps novelists that want to move into screenwriting. Thomas is like myself. He's a screenwriter moving into novels, so he has that particular perspective. Niall Leonard, down there, he's another combined threat or virtue. He's a screenwriter, a novelist, a director, spanning over 3 decades of work. His novels include M. King's Bodyguard, as well as Crusher, Incinerator, Shredder, which is a series, right? Yep. His recent work, A Heart Within the Beast, is a contemporary take on Dante's Inferno. He and his wife, E.L. James, have been responsible for keeping the 50 Shades film franchise moving forward. Now, as for myself, I'm Stephen L. Sears. I always have a problem mentioning who I am. I am a screenwriter. I started out in television. I've been doing this for 38 years. The second show I was ever staffed on was The A-Team. But I've worked on Riptide, A-Team, Hardcastle McCormick, Stingray, J.J. Starbuck, Jesse Hawks, Walker Texas Ranger, Superboy, Swamp Thing. I was the co-exec producer, one of the head writers for Xena Warrior Princess. I also co-created the last version of Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, and I'm also moving into the prose area. I have a graphic novel out with Kevin J. Anderson, and so on and so on and so on. So, with all of that out of the way, let's get into this. There are really 3 basic areas that we want to talk about, or at least that should be attended to. One is the creative, the other one is the actual writing, and then there is the marketing and sale. Now, as I said, whether a novelist going to screenplays or screenwriter going to novels, not everybody can make that transition, but everybody thinks they can. And we cannot get into everything that can help you make the transition, but we're going to try to get your heads thinking in the right direction. Now, the first thing I want to mention, just to get it out of the way, is the obvious format difference. The best way to tell a story, aside from being face-to-face, on the written page, is actually the way a novel is written. Those are words coming right out of your head onto the page as you want to express them and want to craft them. Now, if you've ever seen a screenplay format, it is not that way. A screenplay format is first and foremost a story with real characters. And then secondarily, but just as important, it is a blueprint for a production. That's why it is formatted that way. And believe me, nobody sat around in a committee and decided to do it. It just kind of evolved this way. That's why you've got slug lines instead of chapter headings. The characters are isolated. Their dialogue is isolated. And anything that you would normally think you can imply or say as an inner voice, you are not going to be able to do that in a screenplay. It has to be seen or heard. Those are your biggest differences. But now we're going to move into other areas here. And some of these questions are going to be somewhat random, but they do kind of follow a track. So Niall, I'm going to start with you. Now, structuring your story outline for a novel is quite a bit different than structuring it is for a screenplay. Now, if you have a novel, and it is your baby, it is your masterpiece, and you have to go back to the core to reimagine it for a screenplay, do you have to rip apart your masterpiece at its core?
I think the answer is no, well, depending on the novel. In my experience, the first novel I wrote, Crusher, it was very, very hard. I tried several times turning it into a screenplay. There were huge chunks of exposition at the start. It never really cracked. But other times, certainly the screenplay I worked on that I'm best known for, which is the 50 Shades movies, it was a question of finding the parts of the novels that everybody loved and making sure that they all appeared in the movie. So it was very important in that respect to stay faithful to the source material. I think if it's your own novel, you can go to town and take it to pieces. But I mean, it's the nature of the novel itself. And if you're adapting a novel, it's the nature of the novel that dictates how much you can use on the screen. Some novels have got tons of interior dialogue, interior monologue. Others are everything's on the surface, and it's much more straightforward. In my experience, anyway, the very first adaptation of a novel I did for television was a thing called The Dark Room. I say television, but it was a feature-length adaptation. And it was a murder mystery involving a young woman who had lost her memory, and her best friends have been found horribly murdered. And in the book, she spent the entire story in hospital recovering from this loss of memory. Meanwhile, the actual murderer killed himself and wrote a note confessing to everything, which was not very dramatic and not very effective on screen. So basically my job was, I remember the first thing I did was get her out of the hospital halfway through the book. So she became the active detective, if you like, trying to solve the mystery of her friend's murder when it could have been her. And that made it a lot more interesting. So I would say the first job I did, I was very, very cruel to the book. And I don't know what the novelists thought, and I never got to meet them. But that time you had to take liberties. Other times you've got to stay close to what you've been given.
Okay. And interestingly enough, you brought up the exposition problem, which is something that curses every writer going from one area to the other. So, Mr. John Truby, I'm going to ask you this question. Exposition is completely normal in prose. The inner voice can talk about emotions, feelings, reflect on the past, all of that. However, that is death in a screenplay. When you hear people talking to each other about things they already know about each other, it will kill a scene. It will stop it in its tracks. So it still has to be there. The implications have to be there. So how do you avoid it and accomplish it at the same time?
How much time do we have?
See?
The first thing I tell writers in any medium when it comes to exposition is do less than you think. And I mean a lot less. Writers always overdo the exposition because they think, I've got to tell the reader all of this stuff and I got to tell them now. You don't have to tell them all that stuff now. Just track the character from the beginning where you're first trying to establish them, and then you can weave in that exposition as the story goes along. That way it's not this top-heavy junk at the beginning, which basically makes the reader say, I'm out. You just cannot let that happen. Now, another technique that's really helpful, I find, for exposition is always do it through conflict. Have people fight about it. Because as soon as you fight about exposition, you're taking information about the past and you're making it relevant in the present. And as soon as you make it relevant in the present, as soon as it becomes dramatic, then I need to know about it. I'm interested in it. If it doesn't have conflict involved with it, it's really tough to get that in. But the first rule I mentioned, that handles almost all your problems. Just, you see that exposition in the first page, just cut it all out. All of it. Get rid of it.
And scene.
Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, I would say that one of the biggest things you have to tackle is that issue, is trying to get that, and that's going to take a lot of practice. You're going to do a lot of rewriting trying to make that work. Ines, I'm afraid I'm going to throw you a hardball here. Okay. So now there is an emotional depth to writing that absolutely depends on engaging the reader's fantasy imagination through the written word. Now, how do you preserve that in a screenplay when the written word has to be interpreted through a camera lens and through a production crew and through executives? How do you retain that in your screenplay?
That's not hard, and it's not hard because I come from documentary television. And there's this wonderful guy, Desmond Morris, who wrote this book, The Human Animal.
I love him.
12 Stages of Intimacy. Have you seen that? Okay.
I love Desmond.
So that's one of the things that I took with me over into the novel writing world is the 12 Stages of Intimacy. And when I'm teaching the 12 Stages of Intimacy, I come from television. So when I'm teaching the 12 Stages of Intimacy, I talk about it in terms of the 3 basic shots. In television, we have the close-up of your face, the medium shot of your face and your torso, the long shot of your entire body and a little bit of the setting. And it's jarring when you try to go from close-up to a long shot, and vice versa. When you try to go from long shot to really close-up in your face, people flinch. It takes them out of the story. So you want to go close-up, medium, long, medium, close-up, right? Same things with the 12 Stages of Intimacy. So the 12 Stages of Intimacy the 12 Stages of Intimacy is all about how primates, human beings, how we move closer to getting to the good stuff. So it starts with awareness, then it's eye to eye, then it might be you talk to the person, and then it might be hand to hand and hand to shoulder. There's 12 steps. So the same way that we move from close to medium to long is the same way that you go up and down the 12 Stages of Intimacy. You don't start when you just meet someone, unless you're a certain politician, you don't grab them when you're not supposed to. That would be, you could get a punch to the face. So instead, we are taught to move, we're taught socially, and hopefully you see how this can work technically, both in your writing and if you're actually using shots. You move from awareness, eye to eye, at some point you shake hands, at some point you're close enough to kiss. And it's always interesting to me that the kiss comes before hand to face, because giving someone control of your face is even more intimate than giving them control of your mouth. And then you can progress down. But if there's an obstacle, if there's some type of a conflict, you go back up the stages of intimacy. So again, the same way that you would do it with a camera shot, showing that progression, you do the same thing with the prose.
That's a great answer, and I will tell you, I want to explain, she mentioned Desmond Morris. I have recommended Desmond Morris to people who want to understand character and connection. He is an anthropologist, and I recommend that you study those books as well as screenwriting books. Understand how people work, how they relate to each other. And as soon as you mentioned Desmond, I'm like, yeah, there we are. Awesome. We can have some great conversations. So Thomas, hey, you're up. All right. Now, Thomas, you are somebody who has adapted many, many source materials into screenplays. Novels can often follow different points of view from chapter to chapter, focusing on different characters. Now, do you have that luxury in screenplays? And if you do or don't, why or why not?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you guys all for coming out. I wrote a post on Facebook in the group thanking this community for your support during our 5-month writer's strike. It meant the world, and the support that we felt from authors, novelists around. When we were on the picket lines, we were talking about the groundswell of support that we had, and I just want to thank you guys so much. Writer to writer, it meant a ton to us. I want to thank you for that. No, really. And it's amazing seeing, I mean, it looks like about 1,000 people are here. Just incredible. Facebook doesn't know. Shh. The deal is that Aristotle has nothing on the filmmaking process, right? There is no, we can jump location, we can cut anywhere at any time. So actually that part of novel writing is utterly translatable into screenwriting. As a matter of fact, desirable. The cutaways, cut away to the villain, cut away to the secondary lead, get your third and fourth plots going. Sahara, just as an example, a Clive Cussler novel that is 179,000 words. The screenplay for it had a maximum of 22,000 words, and yet you want the experience to feel roughly equivalent. How do you do that? The only way to do that is to take as many elements as you can and add them into elements that are already there, right? A scene in a novel can be about one thing. A scene in a screenplay has to be, especially when you're adapting a dense novel, has to be about 2, 3, 4 things. So being able to jump from one location to another, from one character to another, gives us a great opportunity to hit the ground running, to enter a scene in the middle of it, not at the beginning of it. In the middle of what John said about put your exposition in action is definitely one of those things. Every time you cut, it's an opportunity to cut out everything that you don't need and get to the heart of the matter, get to the beating heart of the scene as quickly as possible, and to be able to put in the 2, 3, 4 things that you need to accomplish in that scene that you otherwise in a novel might have to just do one.
That's great. Okay, so leaping off of that, Niall, I'll come back to you, because this also touches on something you answered earlier. So you've got 150,000 words. Now, we're going to put it down to 120 pages, and we're not going to lose anything. So how do you pick and choose how you edit and what you edit?
Well, I guess, I mean, one of the things, one of the places I would start with would be what would have maximum visual and dramatic impact. You focus on the things that are going to jump off the screen, because that's going to make a powerful movie. And sometimes you actually have to just lose characters. I mean, there was a particular character, I remember when I was working on a movie adaptation, where the author was very keen on having this character involved in order to set him up for further down the line. And I pointed out that we might never get further down the line, and he didn't actually do anything in the story. So I give him the old heave ho, and there was some argument about that, but it worked out fine in the end. We didn't miss him, and the story worked great. So you have to. I think you used the phrase, and it's a familiar phrase: "Kill your darlings." Sometimes you have to be ruthless. You have to focus on what makes the story great, what makes it visual, and what makes it dramatic, and things that don't make the cut, you cut them.
Very good. Very good. John, right here. Okay, now you have written books about how to tell story and write in different genres. Now, do you find that specializing in genres is a plus or a minus in film? Can screenwriters go across genres easily? Novelists tend to stick to one genre. Tend to. That's generalizing.
It's, first of all, the mix of all the mediums is complete now. It used to be a very clear difference between film and television, for example. You know, you get your epic in film and you get your intimate story in TV. Well, the greatest epic of the last 20 years is Game of Thrones. You know, what movie is close to that? But this question about genres, it is in every medium. It's not whether we'd like it to be, it is there. And we have to understand that to be successful as a storyteller, this is something I've been hitting all day, you have to create your unique story brand. You have to do it within a genre world. Now, the fact is, most stories in whatever medium are now a mixed genre story. That comes from the marketing side. It's the old marketing trick of give them 2 for the price of 1. And then it was 3 for the price of 1, and so on. Why? Because genres are different plot types, each with their own set plot beats. And so there is a tendency within a limited amount of time in film or television, and now also in novels, to give them more plot in the same frame. And the way you do that is you mix genres. So what I always tell writers is specialize. These are very complicated story systems. I don't know any writer, and I know more writers probably than anybody in the world. I don't know any writer, and these are all professionals here. I don't know anybody who has mastered more than maybe 2, maybe 3. So you've got to be known as the best in the world at that genre. And you can only do it by really focusing and writing those stories. Now, having said that, that means because it is also a mixed genre world, you need to have a primary genre that is the foundation of the story. You also need to then mix in those other genres on top of it. And it's a whole other subject of how do you mix genres without getting story chaos. Most writers have a lot of trouble doing that. But the trick is you have to know what the primary form is and use that to set the spine of the story.
Good. Now I'm going to add a little bit into that as well. I agree with all of that. Absolutely. I will say that back when I started, which was the 1980s, you were pigeonholed where you started. If you wrote detectives, that was it. That's all, and your career was over when that was done. Now, I will say, a little pat on my back, I have managed to cross genres for the last 38 years. This right here is actually a reflection of my television stuff. Now, the reason I've been able to do that is a lot of what John was just talking about. These genres naturally will cross each other. There's a huge overlap. Like adventure. Okay, you write adventure. Well, adventure can be sci-fi, but sci-fi can also be a Western. You can cross across these genres. But in reflecting, one thing I found, the commonality was that I would write characters, real characters, and then put them in those situations and play that world as real to them. But for most people, I agree 100%. You're going to focus in on one, and that's going to be your expertise, and then you will possibly play around the edges there and just explore, see where you're going to go. Back to Thomas. Yes, we're back to you. Speaking of genres, many authors specialize in a particular genre. So as far as books or genres of books, which ones have the best chance of becoming a screenplay, in your opinion?
Okay, being one of the writers on Cowboys and Aliens, I can tell you that you can cross genres pretty successfully right in the middle of, right in the title. It was part of the sales pitch. Look, we're all just writers, right? I mean, there's no genre in novels that absolutely will not work in film, right? We're all just writers, right? Everybody up here, we get into our Bugatti Veyrons the same way you do, just one leg at a time. When we take our revitalization shots with that toddler blood, maybe we do it slightly more often than you do, but it's basically the same thing. That said, I find that for novelists, a very important part, and especially for indie novelists, where you guys are doing all your marketing, knowing your readers and hitting your tropes is one of the key factors, right? The cover has to say, like, in trad publishing, they can do an arty cover that doesn't tell you what the genre is. In your work, the cover has to say the genre, right? You gotta be able to market it right away and get that across. If you're writing billionaire reverse harem, you better hit those marks or you're going to get a lot of angry reviews, right? I would say that for film and television, you have to transcend the genre. You have to have that thing, that element that is well beyond what that genre does in a way that, wow, I've never read a detective story that's quite like that. And I just got to tell you, there's a book called Anatomy of Genres by some guy named John Truby. I think, available in any bookstore right now. And
you'll get the check later.
Seriously, it's so good. I was fanboying with him before we started. It really is so good at laying out, at breaking down everything that genre is. And the way he does it is it's done in such a way that it's so comprehensive that you can literally see the source code of each genre to some degree and figure out what is the added element, what is the element that is going to transcend that genre, that is going to make it more palatable. Listen, romance is hard. If you're not writing for Hallmark or some of those channels, and those channels are super hard too because their specifications to write for those genres are so specific. What they want for their show is tremendously precise, and it's almost a gated community that's really hard to get into. Thrillers, sci-fi, fantasy, much broader acceptability. There are much more avenues for those sorts of things. And procedurals in television still to this day, look at Amazon Prime and look at all the procedurals that they are buying up and putting on the air. It's evergreen because they're producible. They can put 100 shows out. Even though the streaming model tends not to do that, more and more they're seeing that they want to put out more and more episodes of a character that they love in a situation that they love. I may have been rambling a little bit, but I hope that was helpful.
Okay, now I'm going to go back to Ines for our last question individually, but I want everybody to think about this one general question, which I'm going to give everybody a chance to answer. So I'm going to give you a heads up on that, and the question is going to be, when we get to you, is going to be, what is the top mistake you find authors make when they write their first screenplay? And try to think of at least 3 on yourself so nobody's redundant. But now we're going to go down here and ask you a specific question. You are the author of several series, and you are the goddess of your domain. You are the ruler, you control it, you have everything. You are truly a goddess of the land you have created. Now, how do you transition from the auteur world of that novelist into the collaborative world of film where the gods are many?
Okay, so you're asking me about collaborations.
Pretty much going to that.
So this is how I'm going to take that question. I've been out of, I had one, just so you know, full disclosure, I had 1 semester of film school before I ran back to the proper side of the television wing of the college that I went to, where I spent happily 4 years and happily 2 decades in television. So make sure that's understood. And in television, the round table is something that I miss. There was restrictions to the round table. You know, if you were writing a series with someone, I miss that. I like having boundaries. I tell people that my retirement, I wanted to feel like being wrapped in a warm blanket, and that's what I like to feel like. And that restrictions do that for me. So I do miss that. I'm not sure if I'm going to answer your question the way you want me to, but moving from the realm of television where there was a lot of collaboration, novel writing is very solitary, and I've been a full-time author since 2018. I think I wrote my last script in 2016. I've been a full-time author since 2018, and it's solitary, it's lonely. But I'm also a romance author, and there's a lot of rules in romance landia, but I love the rules because the rules say this is what readers want. These women readers, we're 80% women, there's 20% men that read our books. These women readers, they say exactly what they want. So what I basically, again, I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but
You are actually.
okay, good. Because what I managed to do, even though I couldn't bring my TV people with me, is I brought all those lessons over from television to use them in my books. So the same way that we learned how to hook people between commercial breaks, because remember when we had to contend with commercial breaks and there was no streaming and no fast forwarding on the remember when we used to record on the VHS tape so that we could fast forward? So I had to learn all those tips and tools for hooking between commercials. I had to learn how to remind people after they came back from the commercial break, or remind them after they came back from the 7-day break that they got from my show. I had to learn how to use what we call open doors at the end of episodes, and I had to learn to write episodically. I bring that all into my writing. So I took a lot of what I learned in that realm and then put them in my books, and I hook people in my books, and they go from book to book to book. I hope there was some of an
No,
answer.
that is
Okay,
exactly,
perfect.
that is the best answer for that. There is a mistake to believe that because you have control of your universe, your work is going to be perfect and wonderful. It will be for you. But when you are given restrictions and conflict even within the story structure with other people, you are forced to become more creative and also to get out of yourself and to look back at yourself. It's kind of like if I gave you a gigantic canvas and told you to pick all the colors and all the brushes and everything and do some artwork, you could probably do that. But if I now said your canvas is only 4 by 3, you have 7 colors to deal with, and here's your one brush, now do the same thing and create art, that forces you to be a creative person. So your answer was absolutely wonderful. Thank you for that. So now, let's get back to that question. So we're going to go, starting with you, sir, Mr. John Truby. What is the top mistake that authors make when they try to write their first screenplay?
Well, as an author of a novel, you have tremendous freedom. And it's all based on the beauty of the words. In film and television, there's none of that. It's all structure. It's all bones. Just give me the bones. And that means that the story is much faster in film. And this is something I learned when I first started out. I was a script reader. And it's a horrible job, but it's worth doing for about 2 months. Because you will read scripts written by some of the top writers in town. And what you see is, between the ones that actually get consideration versus everybody else, which is 99% of the rest of them, it's a difference of speed. The pacing on these really good scripts is a whole different league from everybody else. And that's from knowing the structure, the basic structure of your story so well, so tight. And as Thomas said, those scenes have got to be compact. You've got to be doing a lot of business, taking care of a lot of business in each one of those scenes. And what that means is that each of those scenes, probably each one of those scenes is going to hit a structure beat. And when we talk about beats, what is a beat? A beat is a plot event with structural importance. Almost every scene in a screenplay has to have that kind of structural power so that the narrative drive on that script is unreal. You always want to be faster than the reader. And by the way, one related thing, keep that description to 2 lines, maybe 3. They're not, and I can tell you, the reader is not going to read it anyway. If it's more than that, because they got to read all these scripts really fast. They don't have time to read all that description. They're going to go right to the dialogue. And so, and that's another huge difference from that and novels. But main thing is, it's all in the bones, make it fast.
Thomas.
Yeah, first of all, I got to echo John. You know what we call everything that's not dialogue in a screenplay? The black stuff. That's what we call it, the black stuff. It's what, just skip it, go, yeah, fine, whatever. Where are we? We're in a lake house, fine, good, whatever. What are they saying? Right? That's the way it is. I'm going to go super practical. If I knew what I know now, but I was completely on the outside looking in and I wanted to have a career as a screenwriter, the number one thing that I would do is I would write something compelling, interesting, and dirt cheap to make. I would write the most contained 2-3 location thriller, 3 location if I was writing a romance, it would be the 2 likable characters that hate each other that get snowed in. And the whole thing happens in the snowed in place while they're waiting to be dug out. Right? If I'm writing a thriller, the doors lock or it all takes place in a van in the desert, I would write that because the number one thing that is the reason that we have a gate-kept industry and publishing no longer does is the cost of it. When music production became something everybody could do in their garage, the music industry collapsed. Gatekeeping left the room. But filmmaking is a expensive, collaborative art, and it is always going to be expensive. The cheaper you can write it, the cheaper you can make a deeply compelling story. And you guys, novelists are incredibly creative, and creativity works amazingly within boundaries. If you give yourself that boundary and make something super cheap and super producible, you also have what we call the forget you factor. You don't want to buy it? Forget you. I'm going to make it myself. I'm going to talk to a local camera house and get them to donate a camera. We're going to shoot it on weekends for the next couple months. So many amazing careers started with a person saying, I'm not getting any traction here, I'm just going to make it myself. And if you have a super contained story that works, that's what you're going. That is the way I would go about it if I was on the outside looking in today.
Coen Brothers, Blood Simple. Absolutely exactly what you're talking about.
Amazing. Neil LaBute in The Company of Men, like 4 locations in the whole thing. Amazing.
Reservoir Dogs, actually, the 5 guys in a shed.
Yep.
I mean, well, that's most of it, yeah. Also Saw, believe Saw is 2 guys locked in a toilet. Or something like that. I mean, and horror movies, people make horror movies because you get a tremendous visceral impact, and you can do it on a very low budget with very few people. That's when a lot of people got their start in that sort of thing as well.
So, but Niall, go ahead with that question then. The one mistake that you think most authors make when they try to transition to a screenplay.
Several things occurred to me while the guys were talking there. One was that when you asked it first, the first thing I thought was the people who write stuff that they think they've got across already. They refer to, I'm thinking of a script I read with he takes the trophy out of the cupboard, the one that his company gave him after 20 years of employment. I'm saying, where does it say it's 20? How do we know it's 20 years of employment? It's this. You don't realize that amateur, the unexperienced, doesn't realize that you actually have to show this or find a way of showing this on screen. And that's very difficult. It's related to the exposition question. It is an exposition question. You have to find a way of doing it. Sometimes you use a flashback, flashback of when his retirement, when he got handed the thing, something like that. But I mean, that's cheesy, but it would have been better than not knowing anything at all. The other thing I was going to say about the mistake others make, and I'm going to be a bit controversial here because T.D. actually said that he focused on the words. I would sometimes focus on having no words because the stuff I love writing is, when I started out, I would put in tons and tons of dialogue, and my God, it just went on and on, blah, 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 blah. It took me years to turn myself to just use the minimum amount of dialogue to get the point across. And I remember being really proud when I actually did a 5-minute scene for TV for British television, again, a feature-length piece, with the opening scene with no dialogue whatsoever. It was just and it had tremendous emotional impact. I'm not going to explain the context, but if you can aim for that sort of thing, I think that's a tremendous achievement if you can make it work.
Ines.
I think we got some really great explanations. Can I go in the reverse? Because I wonder if there's any screenwriters who want to write novels, because that was me. I learned to write screenplays first, and then I try to translate that into novel writing. And the number one thing that you will likely mess up is head hopping, because the camera can go wherever you point it, but once you're confined to that page, readers are going to get really mad if all of a sudden you're talking in one character's POV and then you hop out of someone's head and start talking to another character's POV. That and the notion of pantsing. I didn't learn that word until 2014 when I tried to write my first book, and I know what people were talking about, because there's no such thing in TV and film as pantsing. There's structure, there's pacing, and I'm a productivity babe. If you guys have heard me talk before, or you know that I carry my planners with me everywhere that I go, they're behind me right now, or they're over to the side right now. I'm all about how can I get better? How can I get 5% better, 0.5% better? And if you're pantsing, I don't understand how you get better. If you're anti-structure, if you're not studying structure, if you're just like, I'm just gonna go and just write this out, and you're not looking at the rules of genre, the rules of trope, where you should be landing in your plot. If you don't know what Aristotle told us how to properly construct a story, structure makes you better.
Very good. And for myself, I'm going to go something very, very simple, but believe it or not, this is something that amazes most people. You'd be surprised how many authors start their first screenplay at having never read a screenplay. That is a truism. Now, I broke into the business totally by accident. I never intended to be a writer. However, I enjoyed reading scripts, and I broke them down. I outlined them because at that time I was an actor, and I wanted to understand what the process was from its base core. So I read as many screenplays as I could. I broke them down into an outline, not realizing that I was creating a beat sheet. And then for the fun of it, I tried recreating my own script and seeing if I was naturally following a rhythm. but you would be surprised how many authors say, okay, I know what the format looks like. I'm ready to write my screenplay. Study screenplays, and secondarily, study screenwriters. That's extremely important.
Can I hop on that for a second?
Yes.
So reading screenplays can send you the wrong way too a little bit. So one thing to keep in mind is that shooting scripts and spec scripts are radically different things.
Yes.
A spec script is a sales document that is getting people excited about a movie. A shooting script is a blueprint for all of the other creatives that'll be involved in the process in making that thing. If you are reading a screenplay and it has scene numbers in it, you're reading a shooting script or something that is closer to a shooting script. Try to get your hands on spec scripts, scripts that were written and sold in order to be made, that were made in, let's say, the last 10 years, because the format does evolve over time, and you'll see, I think the format has mostly changed for the better. I think the divergence of spec script versus shooting script is largely a good development, because what it's done is it's made the script itself more of a story document than it was a blueprint, and I think that's generally a good thing. And what people are going to be wanting to see from you in the industry is more of the spec format. So
Yeah,
sorry.
and that is very, very true. Try to get screenplays that have been produced at the spec level if you can get those. And I will add one other caveat. Try to avoid scripts that were written by the directors of their own scripts, because they can call their own shots. You want to see what the original sales tool was for someone at your level as a screenwriter. So that is, we are just about out of time here. If anybody wants to have any type of questions, okay, we'll get one question here at least. We have one in the back.
A lot of us authors that
wait.
write books that have for the streamers.
Yes.
There are a lot of writers who write stories that have animal characters in them. I'm in the fantasy genre, urban fantasy, but a lot of stories have animal characters, and we make a lot of money having those animal characters in them for stories. They're very lucrative. I do cats, a snarky talking magical cat. I have an agent, Chip McGregor, you may have heard of him. We've been pitching stuff. We've had a little bit of interest, but I have been asked, like, well, can you adapt it to screenplay? I'm like, well, I'd love to. I can learn how to do that, but what do I do with a snarky talking cat? Like, could it be CGI? I mean, that's a bit more of a technical, but if you're making tons of money with a primary character that people love, because it's a cat and people love cats, and it's a talking magical cat, should I just give up and never make film out of my books? Is there like a trick to it? Is there any info you can give us to help? Because there's a lot of us that have animals in our books.
Okay, interesting question. We have 1 minute, unfortunately. Somebody want to grab that one? Because
I would say go for it, frankly. I mean, Look Who's Talking came out 15, 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So that had talking animals in the family. John Travolta, maybe I'm showing my age here. But so that's nothing new. But, if your things about a talking cat, just go for it full on. Just let the cat talk. And the CGI, I mean, that's you can do that on a Mac computer at home these days, so it's not a big deal. Make the script the best thing you can and as true as you can to your story. That's what I would suggest.
write it as real as you would write it. Let other people to worry about that. I was hired by Disney to write Look Who's Talking for a dog. So don't be afraid. Never say to yourself, should I do it or should I just can it? No, you just go with it.
There are tons of places that make animated films and animated CGI-esque films. No reason not to do it. Absolutely.
And that is it. We are done with our time. Thank you, everybody who was on this panel. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Everybody who showed up. This was fun.
Sorry, we only